Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thursday Gathering at Venture Cafe Tokyo, CIC Tokyo, and welcome to the June 2023 meetup for Robotics X Tokyo. My name is Mike Sudano, and I'm the co-founder of Robotics X Tokyo, along with a couple of other co-founders who will be here later, Tim Trahan and Marco Schimmick. And, let me just very quickly introduce you to the organization. So we want to bring together roboticists in all of Tokyo and eventually all of Japan, just to sort of grow the industry, the robotics industry. We love networking. We love finding people jobs. We love finding companies people. So definitely contact us if you have event space or if you want to sponsor, perhaps, anything like that. So what we've been doing for the past few months is we've been doing Robotics X something. We had done education one time. I think we're going to do a healthcare one. We've done one just about news, robotics news in the past. And one of my passions besides robotics is video games, as a lot of roboticists also love, I'm sure, being that you're, affecting the world through a device. And I figured, what's a really great event is Robotics X video games. And there are plenty of examples of robots in video games, and we're going to talk about some of them tonight. The goal of this event, and I think we lost our title somewhere. I don't know. Oh, there it is. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Okay. So Rob the robot, bringing it up. I wanted to bring together video game professionals and also robotics professionals to just talk kind of casually on robots and video games from a lot of different aspects. So initially I thought of this as, can we go through as engineers and think, would Metal Gear actually be able to walk under its own weight? Or could Mega Man actually slide like that, given the friction on his metal? So a lot of things, like that from a real perspective. And then going the opposite way and saying, does this Boston Dynamics robot look good enough to potentially be in a video game? Or if we were to put this in a platformer, what could it do? So we're going to, look at stuff like that and also look at examples of robots in video games. So I'd just like to quickly introduce our panelists. So Arka Roy, and we'll go through in a second and give backgrounds. Atsushi Tokoro. And Nidal Ivan who's going to be on his way in just a second. We have another member from the venue here to fill in, so people aren't confused. Just for now. I think he likes video games, though. And then myself, I'm Michael Sudano. Mike, and I'm the moderator for tonight. I'm with Woven by Toyota, and we are hiring, by the way, obligatory hiring. So first, I'd like to give it to Arka to talk about his background, and feel free, jump on the mic.
Hello. Hi. I'm Arka. I have been in Tokyo a really, really long time. I won't even say how long. I worked in games back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And some of them had some robotic elements in them. And then in the 2000s, I worked in two fields that might have some relation here. Well, one is I was freelancing, so I did some work with a company that makes virtual digital assistants. I actually joined them much later, about 10 years later, but I did some work with them. And I did some work with Toyohashi Institute of Technology. And there was a prof there who was doing research, like they had a robot arm device. His big goal was to send this thing to the moon to collect rocks. I did not know the robotics, the really hardcore control systems engineering. But what I was doing was I was making software to help those guys, like, for example, an interface with MATLAB, things like that. So that's sort of the summary of my relevant experience.
Can we just go back for a second to
Yeah, so this was Aquazone. This was we released this in 1993. Like that's really a long time ago. I mean, there wasn't really a public internet then. We released it on the Mac, like on floppies. The price was $24,000. Not dollars, yen. Would have been nice. Yeah.
That's still a lot.
That's still a lot. It might as well have been $24,000, and it was buggy, but that was expected. In those days, all programs on the Mac were crashing left, right, and center. Yeah, and this actually Aquazone is considered to have kicked off the digital pet boom. In fact, the people who made Tamagotchi, they also acknowledged that Aquazone had been one of their inspirations. At first, we were really, really orthodox about wanting to simulate everything perfectly, like the water chemistry, the fish. Neon tetras have these attributes. Catfish have this attribute. So it was really, we were really trying to keep it real. But after a couple of years of success with that, we decided to get a little playful. And then we released a series called Mechs, like mecha, And you see some of them up here, the metallic guys. And we even had a little bit of a backstory about where they came from. It was a bit of a dystopic future. And these, they weren't purely mecha. They were kind of, I guess, cyborg in a way. I mean, they had some biological aspects. So that was kind of a fun thing we did at the time. Yeah. So this is one thing. Yeah. And if we move on.
And this was the inspiration for Finding Nemo as well, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Right. Only wish. And then in the late 90s, actually, I was in this corporate group for like 9 years. And the chairman, he spun out a new company called Vivarium. The previous company was called 9003 Inc. He created a company called Vivarium and took me with him. And we made Seaman. We made it for the Sega's Dreamcast platform, and it was the biggest Dreamcast seller for that year. Later, it was eclipsed by Shenmue by by Sega, but Seaman did really well. And then I did a US version afterwards. I actually had to go to San Francisco for a few months. Due to the nature of the programming, we really needed English native programmers to work on it. So it was a whole new project in the US. Yeah.
I have two quick questions about this. So the first one was, for those who don't know, Leonard Nimoy was the voice of Seaman or was the narrator?
Oh, okay. Leonard was the narrator. The actual voice of Seaman in Japanese was the creator, like my boss, Yut Saito. In fact, he was the voice and he was the face. Most importantly, he was the character. The guy is a bit of an ass, and he wanted to express that to Seaman as much as possible.
I see.
We're still friends after 20 years. I don't want to be enemies with Seaman. In the States, we had another voice actor doing the voice of Seaman, but Leonard was doing the narration between chapters
for both the Japanese version and the
in the Japanese, the narrator was some actor. I forget his name. He's passed away since. He was an old guy then.
Got it.
And Leonard's also gone for that matter. And so Leonard did the narration in the US. Yeah.
And then we were talking a little bit before. So my question to Arca was, did you meet Leonard Nimoy at the time? And disappointingly.
Yeah, get this. I had the opportunity to meet him, and I was asked a couple of times by the Sega people, hey, you want to go down to LA and meet him at least while he's in the studio? And here's a guy who's like my childhood hero. And I was too busy. I had deadline. I was under severe schedule pressure, and I was too busy to meet Leonard.
Yeah. So if there's one takeaway, don't work too hard?
Yeah,
Otherwise, you
some
might miss.
regret it later.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess if the schedule had slipped a couple of days, it wouldn't have been the end of the
Yeah.
world.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to Atsushi Tokoro-san. Please take it away.
Hi, yeah. Hi, I'm Atsushi Tokoro. I have a long time experience in the gaming industry. My started career from the EverQuest as game master, but after that, I'm directing or managing or producing many online game or smartphone game and browser game, and mostly as a producer. But recently, I'm more focusing on or exploring new business area like esports or broadcasting application. So I'm really happy to be here to know new area of business. Yeah, thank you so much.
I have a quick question for you about, in robotics, one of the things that's popped up, it's been for a long time actually, but teleoperation. So that means if a robot is in Europe and I want to control it from Japan, I will log in and see the video here and send my commands across the internet to the robot. And if I'm doing a very specific, precise task like surgery or something, the lag has to be very small. So have you worked on applications for games where you're doing synchronous multiplayer and you have to have sort of a very quick back and forth where the lag is very important?
Yeah, that is very important. So if operating an online game, there players, how do you say that? Strategy or working together, and that synchronization is really important. If there's some partner is lagged and cannot back up your character, you will die.
You will be very mad.
Yeah, it's really bad. Synchronization is that.
Got it.
It's really important.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to Nidal Ivan. Please take it away.
Hello. So for me, I'm more of, in terms of development or making more of the robotics side than the video game side. With more of the video game side, more of an obsession I have, which is why it's nice to actually meet actual legends of the industry. And with that, I actually, in terms of robotics, I started with my studies and everything in swarm robotics. So robots communicating with each other and doing tasks. But after graduating, when I looked for work, just to be clear, it was more of a programming side. But my first job was more of like electrical side, where it was more building and wiring and stuff like that. And for years, I've been working there before going back to robotics again. But by then, my experience was more in hardware than software, which is how I ended up with my title, which is basically hardware robotics engineer. And I do have understanding since I've been playing games since as long as I can remember, since I have memory back in like early 90s. If like I actually had this timeline was interesting because I put the consoles I remember clearly, while the ones I have a passing memory of, well, of course, everything before the PS1 was the passing memory, which is written in white. So even though apparently in my family house we had a Famicom, the earliest device I could remember is the MSX. And the interesting thing is, for those who don't know, I came from Saudi Arabia. So the MSX was very special because out of every console, it was the only one that can show text in Arabic. And that's why it blew up. So people can understand back then. And the first actual console I got obsessed with was the original Genesis. Weird fun fact, the Genesis is the American version, while the Famicom is the Japanese version. So in my country, we just have a mishmash of devices. We had the Famicom, not the NES, and we had the Genesis, not the Mega Drive. And afterward, the only reason I remember TurboGrafx 16 is because of the card. It's the only console I know that stores game in cards, which is the faintest memory. I had to look it up to realize the name was, it's the device I've been hearing a lot about. And then my second obsession was the Neo Geo, which is why to this day SNK, sorry, was my favorite console. Not console, like company in general, because they have a lot of IPs I'm obsessed with. That coupled with Sega, now I guess those early consoles is what built those companies in my head to this day.
Which is funny because they don't have consoles currently, but now they're on modern consoles.
Yes, which is, I would say convenient, but they're not as powerful as they used to. So it's much more less IP than it used to be. And then the 3DO, another fun fact is that we didn't, like, not a lot of people spoke English, so we don't use the actual consoles names. We use the company name. So the 3DO was just called, I think, Philips or whatever we called the company.
Philips, was it Philips Magnavox at the time? Was that for 3D, 3DO?
I think they drove, but I think it was more big companies.
Oh,
the mic.
Sorry, microphone. Mike.
So, for example, until the PS3, I think everyone just called the device Sony.
Really?
Yes, every PlayStation was just called the Sony.
The Sony. Did they at least say like the Sony 2 or the Sony 3?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
That's what we
Wow.
called it in around my bubble, basically.
It's interesting because when I was younger, people would say, "Did you get a Nintendo?"
Yes.
But Nintendo Entertainment System, but Nintendo was the kind of colloquial name.
Yeah, about that. To my uncle, all these were called Atari, basically.
Yeah, first one. Yeah.
Yeah, basically
Nice.
That's what we call them.
Nice.
If you notice that after the PS1, it kind of became consistent.
Yeah, same with me.
So I remember the GameCube, we had it because my brother's friend gave it to him. And ironically, the games I got obsessed with are like Resident Evil 0 and Twin Snake, Metal Gear Twin Snake. Those two games are the games I was obsessed with the most. Ironically, I never played any first-party Nintendo games. Even when I got the Wii, the two games me and my cousins were obsessed with was, I think, Budokai Tenkaichi, where you actually perform the motions, and a party game within a Sonic game. Like, we didn't even play the main game. We just played the party games.
Interesting.
So those were on the side because we bring them up when we have guests and we play together.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it then became consistent all the way to the end.
Very nice. There you go. Oh, sorry. Okay. Thank you. And I will have more questions about Metal Gear and Sonic, probably Metal Sonic later on for sure. So my name is Mike Sunano, and I'm a mechanical/operations engineer. So my background is in mechanical engineering, but I'm currently doing operations and deployment for robots at Toyota's Woven City. So I'm with a company called Woven by Toyota. I've designed and built and operated many different robots, and I've been in the aerospace, semiconductor, and manufacturing industries. This middle one here is from a 3D printing company that I was with. I did some testing on the rock abrasion tool on the first Mars rover. This was a bigger one. This is a robot from Toyota Research Institute that I worked on in California. And that is a semiconductor robot, second from the right. So I was working on, putting wafers in and out of fabs. And then finally, that is Toyota's HSR robot on the right-hand side. And yeah, just a little bit background. I am obsessed with games. I can't wait to go home and play Street Fighter 6 right now. And that's pretty much it. So to really jump into this, I wanted to go through what is a robot first. So I'm just going to run down these, and then I'll run down video games, and then we can chat about robots and video games. So what is a robot? The term was coined in 1920. This is basically the first line to every robotics thesis since the year 2000 or something. The term was coined in 1920 by Carl, I don't know how to pronounce it, Capek? Anyone? in his play, Rossum's Universal Robots, and it's a machine, generally physical in nature, though we do use robot for web crawlers and other things like that. And it's able to be controlled, programmed to perform complex tasks through amalgam of electrical, electronics, sensing, and mechanical. Today, we generally say sense through sensors, think through your computer, and then act through an actuator when classifying robots. It could be many different things, so humanoids and rovers and drones are popular examples. But that being said, the line between robots, and other things like drones or quadcopters, things like that. People will say robots for a lot of those things, and then other people will come along and say, but a washing machine is a robot. Hey, look what it does. Your new fridge is a robot. So it's very, hand wavy at some points. And you can see here, both of these robots are from Boston Dynamics. So this is an earlier version of the Atlas robot, which you've seen doing jumps and flips and things like that. And then that's Spot with its gripper mouth thing. Okay, but what are video games? So video games started around the 1940s. The first patent that I found was in 1948 for a cathode ray tube amusement device. I'm not going to click on it now because I'm screen sharing and it'll get all messed up. But you can see the first game, I think, was in 1950 something, and it was called Tennis for Two. Video games are interactive digital experiences. The players can input through some means, thank you, Wii, and your intentions or what you want to do are conveyed through a character or a cursor or object, something like that. Games, many different platforms, categories, and video games have also come to represent lots of genres, like horror, for example, puzzle, and then there's a big debate about whether video games are art or not. Roger Ebert, I think, weighed in on that a while ago. But yeah, basically, that's video games. Do you guys have anything to add in terms of video games or robotics before we move on to the mixture of those two? Yeah, go for it.
I guess you talked about the definitions of robots,
Yeah.
which is very interesting because I assume every single person have their own definition of what a robot is. I personally think a robot is basically any automaton that can do task without the interference, like step-to-step interference of humans.
Mm-hmm.
The illusion of self-thinking or doing something. By that case, as you said, a washing machine, basically a button, and it can do lots of things on its own, depending on its programming. And I think our own definition of what a robot is was influenced by media, mm-hmm. Which it started from like Metropolis and until now, mm-hmm. like every different types of thing could be called a robot if it's not a human, yeah. or like a living creature. Mm-hmm. And I guess if I want to add something about video games, it's that the concept of art. Mm-hmm. I think even Robert Ebert himself said at the end, why does everyone even care what I say? It's because it's an opinion. Mm-hmm. Everyone could think, people can think movies are not art. People can think paintings are not art. Because again, it comes to a definition. And since games within them have movies and paintings, mm-hmm. by definition, it should be the same as those, or even something more, since it's combined lots of different things. And I guess that's what I think about the thing, about this old debate.
Yeah. Do you guys have any ideas about, either the definition of video games or video games as art or anything related to Darian?
I don't know if it's that important, like definitions or, like you're pinning it down, right? I mean, if it's fun and people think it's a video game, it's, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, as they say,
Awesome. Yeah. By the way, Pong, I don't know if you saw, I added a Pong Easter egg. So robots in video games. Yes. There are robots in video games. There are lots of robots in video games. Some examples, some famous examples that we have, of course, Mega Man X. So basically an android in a video game. Also, Metal Gear is a big one. How many people here have heard of Metal Gear or Metal Gear Solid? Wow, not enough. Okay, awesome. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's lots of different Metal Gear games. Shout out to Hideo Kojima, who is no longer with the Metal Gear series, unfortunately. But through this, I think this is probably one of the biggest examples of robots in video games over the past 30 years. And there are tons of them. Yeah, go for it.
Doesn't this start another debate about what's the difference between robots and mecha?
Yeah, of course. And cyborgs and androids and things like that. We'll get there.
Yeah.
We'll get there. Next up, so Nier Automata, another very famous game. This, of course, more has to do with androids and cyborgs and things like that. But there are proper robots in the game, of course. And then lots and lots of robots. This is only for Mega Man. But just the variation in design I love in the Mega Man series. I used to come up with Mega Man enemies, Bone Man, and there are tons. Anything you can think of, there's probably a Mega Man. And the rest. So lots of other games, and you could probably, there's probably people who can name all of these on there. So now what I'd like to do is just sort of think about the comparison of or contrast robots in real life with robots in video games. So if we are designing and building a robot in real life, we have to think about real things like gravity, infrared sensors being triggered by the sun, perhaps, designing for human interaction, choosing suitable components, and things like cost considerations. For video game robots, generally what I think as a roboticist is that you'd be designing for, and not only robots, but just anything in a video game, you'd be designing for aesthetic appeal, what looks good to the player or what fits with the image of the game, the design language in the game world. You'd be working with artificial intelligence behavior to do whatever you need to do or interact in the game world. You'd want to have some sort of believable construction if it's meant to be sort of a reality grounded game. You want to have good Foley for realistic sound effects, so it doesn't sound like a duck, it sounds like a robot. And then physics properties you're going to want to kind of mimic properly. So I actually like to ask Arka, especially as someone who's created and programmed for games, if you were creating something that was more realistic, I know you mentioned the Aquazone before, you wanted to get really realistic, but then you kind of scaled it back. What goes into those decisions? Like, is that from the creator directly that says, I want to make this super, super realistic? And then at what line do you say, we can't make it any more realistic, it's going to be too much cost? Because we struggle with that as well with robotics. We try and scale back based on a lot of different things.
Right. I don't know if Aquazone is the best example for what you're asking, but I mean, at first we just were really fanatical about the aquarium. The environment in the aquarium, the chemistry, the fish. These are real fish like neon tetra and angelfish and stuff like that. And that went on for a few years. I mean, we have this concept. We're about reality, man. But I don't know how that kind of. Maybe we just got collectively tired of that, and we just wanted to be a bit crazy, and so we created a story, and then we tried to be very realistic, within the context of that story. Yeah. So I don't think there was really a trigger there. I think it was just a gradual process of, let's have a bit of fun or something. Yeah.
Got it. And then very quickly for Atsushi-san. So when you've worked on things like sports games and online games, so generally sports games and driving games fall into two camps. So one is either like arcade racer, or arcade sports like NBA Jam versus kind of simulation like Gran Turismo or NBA 2K3. So the games you worked on, were they more for simulation? You want to be very serious about the rules and the physics, or is it more like arcade style?
What is the arcade style?
Doesn't have to be very realistic. Do you know the NBA Jam?
Yeah, focused on basically one is focused on realism, one is
Realistic
focused on
or-
fun.
Yeah.
So it's just based on the concept and what is the purpose for the user's experience. So if we want to provide some specific realistic experience for users, of course we should focus on how much realistic. But the sports also just based on the rule and how do we provide how much fun. And the game is free, so we can arrange any rules. So it's just based on the concept.
I see. So mainly it sounds like you've worked on free to play, free games.
Yeah.
Got it. Sorry, and did you want to add on to the robotics in that case?
In terms of
Designing and building robots?
Well, actually, I think
Sorry
when
about that.
Atsushi said free, I think he didn't mean free in price. I think he meant free to like not constrained by the rules of reality, maybe.
It's not a cost of or price things. It's just free means that you can choose any direction.
I see.
Yeah, that is my image. Like, I would think that since in terms of robotic, I think the difference between robots in real life and robots in video game is that in real life you have a lot of constraints to work around. Those constraints can be less, but they're still, of course, restrained when making the games. In this example, any object you do, it could be the robot. You just have to design the constraints yourself, and whether that gravity, whether that objects colliding, or as you said, if a robot can see even or recognize something, you can simulate it doing whatever. And in real life, you have to think, oh, where would it be doing the task? Is the place going to be warm, cold? Do we need to add stuff to it for it to actually do the task correctly? And something like the weather, I wouldn't think would be a problem unless you painstakingly create a simulated world with heat that will react to other objects, but that will be costly and it wouldn't add anything to the game. And as you said, simulation, you have to make it as close as possible so people can actually it's more impressive, it's more realistic. Or you can think about more arcadey, fun to just sit down, not think about the world or stuff and just enjoy the game itself. And that's my interpretation of both of them. Of course, I have more knowledge for one rather than the other. A famous example could be when the director of Dead Space wanted to add an extra thing at the end and almost broke the whole game just by adding this thing that was slightly different. So you can be actually restrained by your own program if you want to add or subtract something in it. I assume that's the case from the way he told the story.
Got it. And we do have this issue, like you said, in robotics as well, where if we want to add another sensor, just an example from one of the robots I'm working on, we have a series of LiDARs and we're using it to navigate a building. So we added another sensor, and unbeknownst to us, one of the wires was blocking one of the previous sensors we had, and it broke the program to recognize what we were trying to navigate towards. So it's always a balance for what we want to cover. And definitely with what you said about simulation, actually this is probably a good time to move on to kind of shared tools and philosophies. So one of the things I was thinking about is, what is in common with roboticists and video game developers? One of the things from a software engineer, I'm not a software engineer, I'm a mechanical engineer, but from people who work in software engineering, of course, using things like GitHub and version control, FEA and structural analysis is something that's done, and then simulation, a lot of simulation. So have either of you worked in physics engines like Unity or or had to program lower level physics and things like that? I'm wondering how it compares to, for example, doing simulation for robotics. Have you ever had to program a physics engine?
Not so much in terms of dynamics or mechanics, but well, the visual stuff, yeah. I mean, in games you have the degrees of freedom, and like this part is moving, but this is also moving, so you have to calculate that.
Yeah.
And one interesting thing I worked on. A little bit later, when I was briefly in for 3 years. I was in a place called Innis, and they're no longer around. We got a big project from Mitsubishi Heavy Industry to make this Gundam ride. It was a proof of concept. It was a POC, and this was really cool. So this is like robot, but there is a video game aspect inside, but it's also like you're in the ride, you're in the robot, the Gundam thing. And the part I worked on was 3D sound. Like the graphics people, they did all their modeling and building the scene in 3D Studio Max. So what I came up with was these audio objects that you could place in various places. Actually, not even place them in Studio Max, but you can calculate them. And then, when there's a explosion somewhere back there, 10 meters in that direction, that's like it was set up with 5.1 audio, and you can hear it over there, so it's calculated dynamically in the game where something is going on. I thought that was really cool, that whole effect.
Was that the video, the picture you had of like the Gundam pilot training?
Yeah, the Gundam Pilot Academy. It was called GPA.
That's awesome. In Japan.
It was, yeah. It's everything's been in Japan.
Is it a VR game?
It was an amusement park ride, but I don't really know what eventually happened to it. What we worked on was a proof of concept. So for Mitsubishi, yeah. And it's not normally the kind of thing that Mitsubishi Heavy Industry does, but it just happened. There was a manager there who was just a fanatic about Gundam, so it was kind of his pet project. It often just takes one individual,
with power. Yeah. Make a Gundam. Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I wish I could have tried that.
Yeah.
One other thing I'd like to touch on, which is very important, especially lately with the prevalence of smartphones and computers and input devices and Apple's augmented reality device, is UI and UX design and programming for human interaction. So one of the things, as an operations engineer, one of the things that I've been doing lately is to test out the robots around humans. And, for example, if it's a mobile autonomous robot and it's rolling down the hallway and there's a human coming, should it go left? Should it go right? Should it stop? Should it signal? And to determine this, we're kind of getting a lot of data and feedback. So I guess it's almost like doing game testing. So have you worked with any sort of unique A, input systems, or B, unique games that have asked for that sort of type of interaction where you had to really test it? And then follow-up question, have users ever really used your games wrong or broken them or done something you didn't want them to do with it?
Well, no, not really. I mean, again, with Innis, we did some PlayStation titles and with Seaman also. One unusual thing with Seaman was we actually got Sega to build a like a card that goes into the controller, a memory card, because Seaman lays eggs, and that gets stored on the memory card, and there's stuff going on there as well. And there was also we designed a mic called the C mic, which fits in there. So it's all speech recognition based. You converse with the creature. So that was a unique input system that, in Sega, actually did it for us. So that was really cool. Yeah.
When I go to the beach, they call me Sea Mike. So great.
There you go.
And how about you, Atsushi-san? So in terms of user input and interacting with the player, how do you normally do that for your games? So you've mainly worked on mobile games, so I'd imagine it's a lot of touch, but have you ever used any sort of unique input device for your game beyond just a controller or keyboard?
Yeah, in gaming perspective, you know, it depends on the kind of user's requirement, because some people are just simplified and try to enjoy your control or your feeling to mastering your character. But some people, for example, so if you want to controlling some robots, at that time, you know, some people want to have some very complicated controllers to want to mastering up that kind of difficulties.
Yeah.
So, for example, techie is in English maybe steel battalions.
Techie?
No, techie is steel battalions. Steel battalion. Do you know that?
I know it by reputation. It's the one where you have to control like almost every aspect of the robot.
It's many switches.
Is it Mech Warrior?
No. They even had a version on the Xbox where you use the camera to do it, and apparently it had so very like you can do a lot of things like lower down switches, press buttons, look left and right.
Techie?
I know the English
steel
name.
Battalion style.
Okay.
Steel Battalion.
Okay,
yeah.
that sounds familiar.
This is more like focusing on how much difficulty to controlling your robots and the emergency buttons. If you fail to use emergency button, your save data was deleted.
Yeah.
You know, this is a kind of specific.
Really?
But it's very unique.
Simulation.
Very minority type of game.
Yeah.
Very specific. Core fan love that.
Yeah.
But it's not for the majority.
I see.
Yeah, apparently if your like Xbox camera was slightly tilted, it's just gonna be hard to do anything.
It hits eject every time.
Like it needed to be very accurate. It was kind of a like they designed it to be actually what it would be to control an actual robot. And
that's awesome. I'm gonna look that up.
I think the technology was sadly didn't reach that point at the time. And it wasn't successful enough to continue, I guess.
We just should have showed a video of that for an hour. That would have been great.
Yeah. Well, I'm still talking about the West. I'm not sure because this was like just before I came to Japan, I think.
Got it. Yeah, I'm gonna look it up.
Mm.
Thank you. So we have about 10 to 12 minutes left. So I think at this point, unless anybody has any closing thoughts about robotics or video games or anything like that, we didn't really cover, you know, like if robots in video games could work in real life. We just kind of winged it a little. But I'd like to open it to audience questions now, both audience here, and I think we have Zoom chat. I don't know how many people are in the Zoom chat. But yeah, if anybody has any questions for any of the video games professionals up here or the robotics professionals up here, please let us know and we'll try to answer as best as we can. Yes? Yeah.
I have just now an Austrian delegation, so we went to Ishigudo Sensei, Professor Ishigudo, yesterday, and he's very much about humanoid.
Yes.
And, what do you think about the design humanoid or the more cute kind of design, or more like kind of design? So what do you think about humanoid?
So the question was, Rimi-san has a delegation from Austria here in Japan this week, and they visited Hiroshi Ishiguro, who's a very famous professor in Osaka University, and a friend of mine as well. And he deals a lot with humanoid robots, and specifically very realistic humanoid robots, realistic skin, and through his company and through Kokoro. So the question was, what do we think about sort of humanoid morphology versus more kawaii robots, cute, things like that? Please go.
Right. I haven't seen his robots in a while, but there were the ones that looked like him. And I don't know, do you think it was still kind of in the uncanny chasm at that point? I mean, it was kind of weird, wasn't it? Yeah, I think, I'd prefer something that like the Boston Dynamics one in terms of coolness, or something kind of cute, like well, one of the things I worked on was IfBot, and it was one of the slides. Yeah, that was really cute. Yeah, so that's my thoughts.
Was he the one that coined the Uncanny Valley?
No, that was a while ago, but he, through his robots, I think Uncanny Valley became a lot more popular
I
because of
see.
Geminoid.
I think like this reminds me of when you go and see the actual Gundam robot, the big one, and you see the amount of engineers and scientists and people who work on it to make it possible. And I always thought about like if he was less humanoid, you would have much less resource and people to make it, and it would do just as much, if not more. Since adding joints to a heavy robot is not a good idea, especially for a big one. And the fact that you have to have a lot of like gravity controllers and stuff like that within its body, especially when it's trying to go from space to something like Earth or something. So, of course, it's because it looks cool, the design is nice, and that's why people like Gundam. If you just made blocks fighting each other, it will be weird and boring. Like, you just make a big tank in space that can shoot from every direction, and that would be...
It'd be the Tetris movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I always think about this concept. The reason why we make them humanoid is for a purpose, is the way it looks. When, for example, you say cute, some people can go out of their way to make it look cute, just make it like something circular or a square or something simple. And it can have an AI in it that can interact as like the big one. So I guess it depends on the usage of it. And to this point, I still haven't seen an example where a really humanoid robotic would be useful with current technology, at least. Of course, in video games, they show them doing lots of things, almost indistinguishable from human. And until we reach that point, I think less human would be better to be able to learn more to then reach that point. If we pushed hard from the beginning, that might end up just wasting too much resources.
My thoughts on this very quickly are that robots are made in human form to sometimes interact with people. For example, Sophia, which isn't really a robot, it's a puppet, or other humanoid robots are meant to interact with the human world, so opening doors and turning knobs and things like that. So they sort of need a human morphology to act in a human world. I think over time, this will change as we change infrastructure with robots in existence, because instead of creating a robot that can open a handle, just change the handle so it opens automatically, or change the infrastructure. To bring it back quickly to Woven City, you know, we have the opportunity to change the infrastructure to match what devices we want to make. So we don't necessarily have to stick to a human morphology. So I think it's meant to have robots exist in a human world, but that might not always be the case. So I'm okay with more function than form, for sure. Any ideas for robots?
Idea for robots?
Yeah, like your character in game, I guess most of the games you've done have been more humanoid, right? Instead of like mecha or sort of kawaii. So maybe more like human type is good for your games.
But in gaming perspective, this is just based on the concept or vision of the world. So no, if just want to use the monsters, just want to use monster. And if you want to be a kind of a science fiction world of view, just using robots,
it's not restricted.
It's based on a concept in the game. It's not affect for the gaming experience generally.
Yeah, interesting. Do you have any more questions? We have about 5 more minutes. Yes. Hey.
So I was wondering, you guys talk a lot about everything except for science fiction movies, which then become games.
Yeah.
I think the coolest robots come from those.
Gotcha.
No bias,
Do you have an example?
Take, right?
Don't say Terminator.
CPOs and IPOs, and even I mean later you go from video games to movies and movies to video games. yes, I'm a civil partner. So we
Yeah.
didn't talk about that at all. That was
Yeah, no, that's a really
I think one of the
good point.
example Mike put was Star Wars, right?
Did I say? I don't know if I did
It was
say.
one of the examples in the description, I think.
I don't know.
Like
Maybe.
it was even, I think, was like you gave an example of a few games and stuff like that, and I think you mentioned.
Oh
Star Wars
yeah,
as one of
yes,
them.
yes. This might have been okay. So that was the description on the event.
Yes.
Yes, I did say Star Wars, but we didn't specifically talk about things like C-3PO or R2-D2 or BB-8 or anything like that.
my favorite robot, which hasn't been made into a game but from movies, is the Interstellar. Do you remember those?
Yeah, just the blocks.
The
Yeah,
block.
yeah. It
Isn't like Star Wars like more fantasy? Like it's fantasy, futuristic fantasy. A lot of people like compare it to Star Trek, as the Star Trek is the more, not realistic, but like the more scientific, the sci-fi scientific version of it.
yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't say of it because Star Trek came first, I think.
Mm.
Yeah, but like they do. Okay, I guess you're way more of an expert on Star Wars than me.
Probably not. No, I don't. Why would you think that?
To be
Because you're in a suit and I'm in a PlayStation.
not
That's-
really.
That's
It's
why.
because for me, my knowledge of Star Wars come through osmosis more
Okay.
than the actual stuff. Since
Got it.
I heard about it a lot,
Right.
but I didn't consume a lot of
Did
the
they
world.
call it Lucasfilm 1 in?
It wasn't when I was a kid. It wasn't popular where I
Okay.
came from at all.
Got it. Oh.
And I think do the robots in it,
Mhm.
are they more? I know like they have the droid, which are very simplified just for one task, which is
Right.
very accurate to what robots are in real life, done to do one task.
Yes.
How is the world in terms of science fiction? Is it like very apparent by the concept of robotics?
Yeah, there are tons of robots in Star Wars, and even like vehicles are mechanized. You see some of the vehicles that wings can move and things like that. And there are like C-3PO is a general purpose robot. R2-D2 is more of a specific robot, but C-3PO is general purpose. Yeah, so it exists all throughout there. It is highly, mechanized, despite a long time ago.
And how cool do you think are the designs?
From
The Star Wars.
Star Wars, I think they're really cool. Still today, they're pretty cool. R2-D2 is still timeless. One thing, so before we end, we have about 2 minutes. In response to your question, I did want to say that Terminator is really cool, but also really hurt the robotics industry because people see Terminator and now every single Atlas video, the top comment is like, oh, I guess Terminator's here. Oh, Skynet. So like it hurt the industry because people A, over attribute what robots can do because of that, and B, assume that we're all in trouble, and we're not due to robots, at least. The climate change is more of an issue.
More of a
Just
problem.
curious, did Blade Runner not have that effect, or maybe in Blade Runner they're seen a bit more sympathetically, or?
Yeah, and the world was really cool and not on fire like Terminator.
Blade Runner, I'm more familiar with the book
Okay.
than the movie, where it's surprisingly very detailed, especially in descriptions of what things can be. And the idea is that can they have sentience? That was the moral of the thing. Even the name, if they could dream, basically.
Yeah.
Do you know the name of the book?
Yeah, dude, Dream of Electric Sheep.
It's one of my favorite. It's actually the title was what made me read it. I didn't even know it was connected to Blade Runner at the time.
We have to wrap up now. I just had a final slide. So Rob was at the beginning, and now he's going to send us off just for a second. Yeah, when that works. All right. So thank you, everyone, for coming. I hope it was informative, instructive, and please talk to us. We're going to be meeting up for 2 hours now as part of Robotics X Tokyo, and look out for new events coming up in the future. But please talk to us about video games. And actually, they have Smash Brothers in the back over there. So if anybody wants to go and play me right now, you're more than welcome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.